We continue to speak about the illicit trade with WITCO Managing Director Laurent Meffre. And we say good evening. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to your program.
Yes, so we were able to speak about it a little more generally with representatives of AS Bryden and the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association. We get to dive a little deeper specifically into tobacco now. But no, illicit trade, though, has been a controversial issue with many sectors being affected. We want to ask specifically from your angle, what has been your experience in the tobacco industry?
Well, the illicit trade is an issue that affects the industry quite severely, actually, as we estimate that globally there's about $40 billion of tax revenue that is lost worldwide due to illicit trade. And in my career, and I've been with the BAT Group for 23 years, I've had to deal in multiple instances with illicit trade. And this is something, unfortunately, that is a fight that takes a lot of resources, a lot of energy, but that can be addressed successfully.
Now, before your appointment as managing director, at this juncture, you've served in several key roles in different jurisdictions. Have you seen different approaches in some of those places? Because I see Cameroon, Benin, Ghana, other places. What has your experience been in some of those other jurisdictions?
Well, there's obviously different approaches depending on the country, but I think there's always a common denominator, and that's always been something that has achieved very significant results in the fight against illicit trade, which is collaboration with the authorities. Nothing can replace collaboration, because when there is collaboration, and we believe in having a seat at the table, and we believe that dialogue and collaboration always lead to success, and the government starts, focusing on enforcement, there's always a path to success on that.
Now, I'm hearing you talking about the lost revenue in taxes because of the illicit trade. What are some of the other things that would make it a priority that this illicit trade is dealt with?
I think, beyond the loss of revenue, which is quite significant in general terms, and especially I think in today's world, when we're going through a pandemic and a lot of resources are lost and a lot of sectors are affected, I think it's very important that governments can actually capture the full scope of their fiscal revenue. I think, generally speaking, it's a societal issue, because we've seen in a number of countries illicit trade contributing to organized crime, depriving lawful and responsible companies from their jobs, trying to develop the economies in the country they operate. So, you have to look at it from a very holistic angle, and that's why we always refer to as a societal issue, and an issue in which obviously we play an active role in making sure we can combat as much as possible, but in partnership with different stakeholders. And we believe strongly that a strong partnership between the private and the public sector is always the right path to go.
Now, I want to speak about that partnership in private and public partnership in terms of dealing with the illicit trade, but just spell it out for us again, please, in terms of the revenue that is lost in taxes because of the illicit trade in tobacco, and that figure that you'd be quoting, where is it applicable to?
Okay, so globally, as I said, it's about $40 billion US. I think if you want to focus on Trinidad and Tobago, my estimation would be at current level around 30 million TT dollars per year, because it's not just the loss of revenue from an excise point of view. It's a loss of revenue from the VAT, from the green fund, from the income tax, from the employment tax. So actually, when you put everything together from a pure revenue, that I think that will account for about 30 million right now for this year in Trinidad and Tobago.
No, money is one thing, or finances is one thing. Are there also health risks with regard to the illicit trade? And I'm looking specifically in tobacco, in terms of seeing people getting tobacco or tobacco products from different people who may not necessarily be as stringent with regard to their health protocols?
Now, obviously, as you understand, tobacco in itself, it is a product that carries potentially some health risk, and this is only for adult consumption. So Saying from that, the tobacco industry and the responsible industry, which we proud ourselves to represent, we have some very thorough protocols in terms of manufacturing, quality, ingredients. And obviously, when you go to illicit trade, whether it is a contraband product from unknown sources or counterfeit product, you can suddenly, when you make analysis, find all sorts of product. I mean, we've made analysis where we found even some feces, some all sorts of different materials, some very low-grade materials, and that becomes obviously totally substandard and carries a significant added risk.
Now, you're speaking about we just spoke about the health aspects of the illicit trade or some of the health ramifications, and health is something that is on the mind of everyone during this pandemic. So it begs the question, why do governments need to tackle illicit trade in tobacco?
I think, from an economic point of view, first of all, I think, many jobs have been lost through the pandemic. It's a very difficult times. Before that, many families are affected, lives are at risk, and I think as a government put it in a very powerful way, it's about protecting lives and protecting livelihood. So I think it's important, to tackle illicit trade, and not just about tobacco. I mean, tobacco is one aspect of it. As we discussed the other day, there's many aspects to it. The alcohol industry is severely impacted, the pharmaceutical, but also other industries. And I think it's very important, in this difficult time, when especially, budget times are approaching, and the government is looking at ensuring it can have the resources, adequate resources, for the adequate spending. I think it's very important to make sure that we capture all this money that is totally lost into illicit trade, that is defrauding government and defrauding the society, so that this money can be recollected and put to good use.
Now, you spoke of government, and even before that, you spoke of public and private partnership to tackle the illicit trade. Now, even before you speak of that partnership, what has been the role of the industry itself, the tobacco industry, in attempting to deal with the scourge of the illicit trade?
Okay, from an industry point of view, as I say, we believe in having a seat at the table and having a dialogue. Now, obviously, a company like us, very responsible company, we have a name, we have a face. That gives me the opportunity to talk to you today, because illicit trade doesn't come and talk to the media, obviously. We've been engaging very proactively with the authorities. We worked very closely with the Minister of Trade, but also we engaged with the Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance. So we make sure we have this open dialogue always, offering proposal, solution, because it's not just about criticizing, we have a problem. I think, partnership is very important. We cannot expect the government to solve all of the problems. I don't think that's the way we look at it. And that's why we believe in partnership. And I have to say, in the past month, I've been in the country for 8 months now. Every month, I see this partnership growing from strength to strength. And I think we're going to see some very tangible action in the weeks and months to come.
Now, it is one thing to have that partnership, it's one thing to be raising awareness, and we want to speak of some of the ways that you've been raising awareness. You already hinted to, but when we come back from this break, I want to know what people on the ground can look for with regard to saying, okay, well, this is something that is above board versus this is an illegal tobacco product. But we continue that conversation when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Laurent Meffre, the Managing Director of WITCO. And there's a saying, drunk or sober, mind your business. So even during the pandemic, still tackling the illicit tobacco trade. And we are wondering, let me ask the question, Mr. Laurent. If someone seizes or someone is looking at a shipment, a container, a package of some tobacco product, how do they make the distinction, saying, okay, well, this is something that is the authentic deal, the real deal, versus something that is illicit? Are there certain telltale signs they're supposed to be looking for?
Yeah, I think you can look at many ways. And the first way to look at it is the supplier known and a trusted supplier? Is that supplier registered with the authorities if it was at customs? If suddenly you get a supplier we never heard from, I think that's already very suspicious. I think the value of the goods as well could raise the alarm bell. Tobacco products have a cost of production, and obviously, if some goods are declared at an extremely low value, that will already start to raise some concern. Now, obviously, under the Tobacco Control Act, there are some very specific regulations when it comes to packaging, and it's a bit technical now, but there's about 6 of them, and to make it easy for the viewer, but basically you will be looking at packs that do not carry misleading information, such as lights, for example, or low tar. You will be looking at packs that are written in English, because that's the language and only the language that is allowed on the packaging. So if you see any other language, that will already be very suspicious. Also, I think you need to have a unique manufacturing serial number. You need to have your license number that are printed on it. You need to have where the goods are being manufactured and where are they intended to be sold. So that's already the key elements. Anything beyond that, so if you start to see goods in a foreign language and that don't carry this basic requirement, that should already raise some concerns.
So how often do you all go over these 6 areas, these 6 key areas, to make sure that your products are not necessarily being counterfeited or duplicated on some level? Because while you're doing things to make sure that your product is authentic and is going through the correct channels, I'm sure it stands to reason, because of the nature of individuals, that people will be trying to make their products seem a lot more like the real deal. So do you do that kind of surveillance?
Yeah. So obviously, a counterfeit is also a risk. So from a global point of view, we have a unit, that collaborates with Interpol, for example, with all the law agencies. So we have a very close collaboration to make sure that we follow goods that may look suspicious. That's something very important. Luckily, right now, and I think in recent past, counterfeit within our industry hasn't been an area of concern, but it has been for other industries. But we need to keep very, very vigilant as well. That's why it's very important, that in terms of product traceability as well, we have very strong protocol. For example, in the country, we have established distributors. All the products are traceable. They come with an invoice. So I think for the general public, if you start to see product that comes, first of all, at a suspicious price, usually, very low price, unusual pricing versus the recommended price. If you see it is being sold by people that you don't know, you have not seen before in different channels, that should already, before you even try the product, that should already raise a suspicion.
Is there a line or cutoff point that you look at to say, okay, well, it's not worth it? So in terms of whether or not you're tackling the illicit trade, are there costs and benefits that you say, okay, well, below this point, we're not going to pay as much attention to it? Or is there something that you say, okay, well, as much as we can do, we're going to invest to tackle this?
No, we will always invest about it, because it can always start as a small problem, and you cannot turn a blind eye to it, because what we start with a small problem can become a very serious issue, and once it becomes entrenched, once it starts to get into the society, financing some criminal activities, the problem becomes very, very dangerous and difficult to remove. So we believe that we should act at any time, and there's no such thing as a small problem. And we will continue to invest in fighting illicit trade as much as we believe it's necessary.
From the government or the formalized aspect of it, are there some specific areas or specific actions that you'd want to see on the side of government, customs, the police service, to say, okay, well, this is being done to tackle this?
I think it's very interesting you raise this question, because I think from an awareness point of view, and that's what we've been focusing a lot, certainly in the past year or so, and especially through the pandemic, because we've seen an acceleration of some illicit product in the market. But we're moving really rapidly with the authorities from an awareness point of view to taking action. I think what is absolutely amazing is that during the pandemic, and I don't know if you're aware of that, but through the TTMA, about 160 agents, 130 from the police and over 30 from the customs, actually been trained on illicit trade and how to recognize specifically illicit trade in tobacco. I think that's a fantastic achievement. They have been carrying some raids through the summer, and from discussions with government officials, and I can feel also that there's a lot of traction from the Ministry of Trade. I think, you know, there's a real drive from the authorities to tackle the issue.
Now, I know you spoke about different areas or different jurisdictions tackling the problem differently, but how do you envision a regional approach to something like this? Does it help, or is it everybody's dealing with their own problems?
Absolutely. I think it helps a lot because, you know, the problem, when you start to deal with a problem within the country, it means the goods are already within the country, and you're fighting, you know, the war, because it is a war against illicit trade, at street level. The more you can have collaborations between countries, the more actually you can deter and prevent these goods to enter your borders, and collaboration becomes absolutely essential. You know, there's some countries that specialize, unfortunately, or some free zones that are known for the wrong reasons, you know, for facilitating illicit trade. And the more you can collaborate between countries, making sure that some checks can be done. For example, you know, are the goods in transit in that country? Are they already compliant with the laws of the destination country? If not, they should not be even able to be shipped, and they should be seized. That's something, you know, that is extremely powerful. I think the CARICOM, as an economic community, warrants such collaboration and beyond.
Now, you speak of training, you speak of information sharing in terms of saying, okay, well, what the laws are in different jurisdictions. What about the punitive side of it? Should there be sanctions? If so, what kind of sanctions? This is specifically from your point of view.
Okay. Yes, there should be sanctions, and actually, there are sanctions. In Trinidad and Tobago, the laws are very specific about this, and the penalties currently, according to the Tobacco Control Act, for dealing with illicit trade can range all the way to 12 months in jail, which is very significant, and up to 600,000, I think, TT on first offense and 1.2 million on second offense. Now, we can always argue, do we want to be more? But I think, you know, that's already quite significant.
Now, if after this conversation, someone is still saying, well, COVID is a thing, I think we should put a little more effort into that. We don't need to think of the illicit trade at all. What would you tell that person?
Well, I would say at the end of the day, you know, every illicit trade is also a disease. It's a disease that is taking your job, that is taking your livelihood. You know, when governments and countries are fighting hard the pandemic and are looking for revenues. Illicit trade doesn't contribute at all to the good of society, whatever the product is. So it's very important to keep focusing on illicit trade. And if you think about it, there's an estimation that say that, you know, there could be up to 15 billion in illicit trade annually across all different categories, across all industries in Trinidad and Tobago. Just focusing on that, you know, and reducing this significantly will put, you know, very strong way to plug some gaps for budgets. Will help government, you know, to invest in healthcare, in education, and other matter as they seem it necessary. So I think it is a priority, and no one can turn a blind eye to it.
Thank you very much for not turning a blind eye and giving us some insight into it. Laurent Meffre, Managing Director of WITCO. And we want to thank you for tuning in on behalf of the entire news team. I'm DK Rosta. Have a good night.